Remember that time you had fun? Well, I'm any company, and I sure do, and I'm gonna milk money out of you for the next 40 years on the basis of that memory. Franchises are a big problem, and the source of the problem is memories. It's your memory of having had fun with something one time, and then feeling like you will have guaranteed access to that fun once again if you consume something that is clearly resembles what you once had fun with. For instance, let's think about the Mario games. How much connection is there really between a game like Mario Odyssey and the original Super Mario Brothers? Not that much, aside from iconography and the fact that it's a game about jumping, I guess. Otherwise, Mario Odyssey could have just been an original property. It didn't need to have Mario in it. It didn't need to have the iconography of that classic game. It could have been a fully original game set in this world using the exact same mechanics, and you probably wouldn't have even thought this feels like a Mario game because there's enough different games that have similar mechanics to this, in the time since Mario, that he wouldn't be a necessary go-to for this playstyle. And so the only reason for Mario to be in Mario Odyssey is obviously brand recognition. It's the fact that Mario is the most known video game character. If you put his name and face on a game, it's going to sell well. Now, the Mario franchise has been pretty well handled over the decades. They've made sure that they never tarnished his legacy by releasing too many shitty games with Mario in them. Because memories can be poisoned. If you eventually develop more memories of disappointment with the franchise than you have memories of having fun with it, then that franchise will no longer hold power. However, the fact that it ever had power in the first place, I think is problematic in that it makes it so they're encouraged to just keep making the same fucking games over and over again. And this goes for any, media style, any media franchise. It's always just a matter of, you enjoyed it once, so surely you'll enjoy it again. But the logic here is broken because people have new fun experiences all the time. Every year there's probably a game that isn't from a franchise you knew before that you played and loved. There's probably a movie or a new show that has nothing to do with an existing franchise, but you consume it and you have fun with it. However, if something comes out that has those franchise bearings and it's connected to something you enjoyed before, you're just way more likely to give that a shot. And so it just adds this guarantee for the producers that they haven't necessarily earned. Just because they did make something good once doesn't automatically mean the new thing is going to be good. And moreover, it's like you could just make something new. And it would be even more valuable because it would be a wholly new experience and not just constantly reminding you of this thing from your past. And of course, most producers are going to abuse the fact that they're automatically going to get more attention to a product by having this brand recognition, and they're not going to put the most effort into the future products. You might have a few legacy franchises like, again, Mario or the Zelda franchise, where they put a lot of emphasis on trying to make sure each of them is reaching a certain minimum level of quality because they are known for that. But most franchises aren't going to go that route. Most of them are just going to keep milking your memory over and over again with diminishing returns and hope that you won't notice. What brought me to this train of thought is the Tenchu series. I was planning to do a video about Tenchu for the I Am Games channel called something like What Tenchu Games Are Worth Revisiting Today. Because I grew up with the Xbox game Return from Darkness, I think it was called. It was the port of Wrath of Heaven for the PS2. And I remembered enjoying this game when I was young, and I'd always heard that the first two Tenchu games for the PS1 were really great. So I'm thinking, cool, I want to play these old Tenchu games. I bought 1 and 2 on the PS1 when I found them at some store. And the games after Wrath of Heaven mostly got pretty bad reviews. I remember when they all came out because I've always kept up with review scores of everything. So, all these Tenchu games got pretty bad reviews, and I'm thinking, I wonder if they were actually that bad, and I also wonder if any of them are unique or worth playing, worth revisiting. So let's go through them all. So I start playing Tenchu 1. And while the game is mechanically really interesting and sound, it hasn't aged that well. It's got really weird tank controls that are kind of a pain in the ass, and while the game is sort of built around them, it also feels like it would have just been better with free movement controls that just weren't necessarily a thing yet in 1998 for 3D games. But it had a cool, oppressive atmosphere, it had neat mechanics. The level design was a little sometimes you get trapped in areas where it was just ridiculous difficulty spikes that didn't seem intentional, stuff like that. So I was like, okay, this game's a cool proof of concept. Surely they improved on it. I play a little Tenchu 2. It's not even as good as the first one. They weirdly pulled in the camera. It's uncomfortable. The controls are somehow even worse. And the level design is not that interesting, and there's no music for some reason. So Tenchu 2, kind of a failure. Now at the time it did receive lower scores than Tenchu 1, but you have to consider, again, 3D stealth ninja game was a totally new concept in the late 90s. So it's understandable why these games performed well at the time. And I mean, I can even imagine I would have loved these games at the time, back in 1998, playing Tenchu 1. It would have been a ton of fun because there was nothing else like it. But now that there's tons of stuff like it, and it's impossible to ignore how clunky the controls are and how the level design is not incredible, then going back, it's like, oh, this is never really that good of a game. It was good because it was new and fresh, but it's not like an amazingly well-considered game. It doesn't hold up the way that tons of other games from that era do. Then you get to Wrath of Heaven. This is where the game switched developers, and from this point forward, all the games were made by a totally different developer from the first two. Wrath of Heaven it improves the controls, improves the visuals. However, the level design is even worse, because now they've made it more linear. It isn't as dark, it's not as mysterious, it doesn't have the same edge factor as the original two games. Now, even still, even at this era, early PS2, it makes sense why this game would have been popular. But when you go back to play it now, it just feels overly clunky, the enemy AI sucks, it's really easy, the level design is not that great. Now, from this point forward, all the other Tenchu games are considered crap and terrible. They get really bad review scores. They tried to relaunch the franchise several times. Eventually, the original developers came back, made a PSP game that was ported to Wii. Looks like ass. Finally, From Software, who was doing the distribution of these games in Japan this whole time, decided they were going to make their own Tenchu revival, and then they just went, you know what? Why even put the name Tenchu on this? Let's just make it our own thing. And that's Sekiro. Sekiro is literally a Tenchu reboot that they said, fuck it, why reboot Tenchu? Because at some point someone had to go back and realize Tenchu was never good. None of the games are good today. None of them are worth going back to. And this got me thinking, how is that possible? How could there have been like 10 games in this series and none of them be good? It's because they're selling a memory. You remember the first game being good because in 1998 it was good. But it's not good now. And it's only obvious why in retrospect. And I'm sure there were a lot of people who didn't like the game, even back then. But it had the uniqueness factor, it had the freshness factor. But to continue building on something that was always kind of broken, and then to just, keep putting out the same thing, the brokenness just becomes more and more apparent when it's no longer unique and it's no longer new. And so, every single one of these games, I know people bought them on the basis of, oh, it's Tenchu. I remember Tenchu being cool. And I doubt any of these people who bought these games went back and replayed the first one to check. Probably it was more like, hey, maybe this time it'll be good. Similar to how Tomb Raider was for a while, when the original Tomb Raider games were all considered great, and then Tomb Raider just kind of went to shit for a little while, and, people just kind of ignored it until they had to reboot the whole fucking thing. And now it's extremely successful again, because everybody likes the reboot games. But now there's 3 of those, and they're all the same game. Because, hey, remember when you liked the first reboot? Well, here's the same game again, twice. We could have just made another game. Or we could have done something more interesting with that first game. Like, just build a different game out of those assets, but, like, that has something more unique about it. Because of franchises and their pull, companies will end up just coming up with new ideas and then just putting it into the franchise just so that they can get that brand recognition. Nintendo's particularly infamous for this. I mean, you all know Super Mario Bros. 2. Kirby's Epic Yarn is another great example. The original game was supposed to be about Prince Fluff, and they went, he looks like Kirby. Let's just make it a Kirby game. Star Fox Adventures. That was probably a bad decision. Kind of turned people off of the Star Fox franchise because they decided to take a totally unrelated game and put Star Fox in it for no fucking reason. It happens all the time. And it's only encouraged because people do this. Like, this is all the audience's fault. Because if it weren't for people deciding to always just go, oh, I remember that being cool, I'm going to consume the next one as well. If people were instead like, oh, I already saw that. I already saw Batman. I don't want to see a 10th Batman. I've seen Batman. Like, in my mind, as soon as there is a great installment in the franchise, move on. You've done it. You did it. You made the great thing. Go make another great thing. And then don't tie it in to that franchise because you're just watering down its individuality. Again, Mario Odyssey, had it not had Mario, had it just been taken on its own merits, could have been this wildly exciting beginning of a new franchise. Doesn't have to have a franchise. Could have just been a wildly exciting new game, rather. And instead, it's just another Mario game. Now, granted, again, people like that game, people like Mario. It wasn't a big deal in that case, and I'm sure it was built from the ground up to be a Mario game. It's just really funny to think that you would ever approach making a game that plays nothing like Super Mario with the idea of it being a Mario game. Anyway, I hope I've made my point. And I'm not saying franchises can't be good, because sometimes you really can build on things and you can make the same game better. Like, the Pokemon games are all the same game, but they've changed elements of it to, make that game different. I have no problem with that. They've added on to it. The new games, you can catch all the old Pokemon and the new Pokemon. You can do all kinds of new shit with the Pokemon. Pokemon makes sense in this format. But I'm talking more about when you continually bring just completely other things into this franchise instead of just making another one. Like, there doesn't need to be a second Pokemon. That one makes sense as a continuing thing, but it also addresses itself that way. It's not presented as though, like, this is like a new entirely different thing. It's just like, yeah, it's a continuation of the same story that we've been telling for the last 20 years. That's fine. That's not quite the same thing as a franchise. Though granted, Pokemon then also gets turned into a million things that don't necessarily have anything to do with Pokemon. Well, it's a case-by-case thing, as is everything. There's no hard and fast rules. I'm done talking.